It's basically a universal law of physics, and I guess of breakfast too. You just can't unmake an omelet by simply unbreaking a few eggs.
Right. Yeah, once that chemical reaction happens,
Yeah,
the structure is just fundamentally altered forever.
exactly. You apply the heat, and you simply cannot reverse the process. But, in the realm of politics, we routinely see these entire campaigns built on the promise of basically unbreaking the egg.
Which is an incredibly powerful promise, emotionally speaking.
Oh, absolutely. And welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at this really rigorous analysis by Roderick Macmillan. It's titled, If a Light Was Left On, Why Are Scots Still in the Dark?
And we should probably be really clear right up front about our approach here.
Yes, definitely. To be completely clear to you listening, we are not here to take a side on Scottish nationalism or Brexit or any of the politicians involved. We are just here to strip away all that intense political emotion.
From both sides.
From both sides, yeah. We want to look purely at the unglamorous mechanical blueprints of what it actually takes for a newly independent nation to rejoin the European Union.
We're basically just reading the map to help you understand the terrain. No endorsements, just the facts from the source material.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this because, we do have to start with that emotional pull, which is just undeniably powerful.
It really is. And the source actually grounds this emotional pull in hard data. Macmillan points out a 2026 poll showing that 58% of Britons now want to reverse Brexit.
Wow, 58%.
Yeah. And what's really striking is how closely that mirrors the 61% of Scots who voted to remain in the EU way back in 2016.
So the baseline desire to just go back, to unbreak that egg, is very real and measurable across the board.
Exactly. The desire is absolutely there. But the author argues that this desire is being channeled into a very specific psychological framework. He calls it a great historical wrong, or a GHW.
A great historical wrong. So this isn't just a standard political grievance, right?
No, not at all. It's a concept used by nationalist movements all over the globe to sort of explain a nation's decline and, crucially, to promise redemption.
It's like a silver bullet for all of society's problems.
Right. When a political movement centers itself around a great historical wrong, undoing that wrong becomes the ultimate cure-all. The framing is basically, every current problem flows from this one historical event.
So every solution obviously requires reversing it.
Precisely. And in the UK, Brexiteers use the initial entry into the EU as their great historical wrong. Now, Scottish nationalists frame Brexit itself as this massive historical injustice that was just imposed on them.
And the power of that narrative, this blew my mind in the article. The narrative is so strong, it actually overwrites reality.
Well, the tank story.
Yes, the author brings up this completely fabricated story about Winston Churchill. The myth is that he sent tanks against the people of Glasgow in 1919 to crush a Scottish workers' revolution.
Which literally never happened.
It never happened. But the narrative of oppression was just so potent that this fake history actually made its way into Scottish school textbooks, like the National 5 textbooks used between 2013 and 2018.
The implications of that are just profound. The source cites a Scottish historian, Gordon Barclay. He found a direct correlation between the spread of this tank myth and the 2014 independence vote.
So a fake emotional narrative can literally override factual history at the ballot box.
It really can. And when we bring this back to the current debate, we see politicians promising that independence is this quick, smooth ticket right back into the European Union.
Like, if you vote for independence, you immediately right the great historical wrong.
Exactly.
But wait, if an independent Scotland wants to rejoin, and let's assume the EU is, highly sympathetic to them, don't they just get back in the queue? Like taking their spot at the VIP line?
What's fascinating here is there is no queue.
No queue at all.
None. The European Union isn't a nightclub with a velvet rope where you just wait your turn. The accession process is much more like trying to get a really demanding multi-year degree from the Open University.
I really like that analogy, but what does the actual coursework for that degree look like?
It's all based on the Copenhagen criteria
Huh.
and what's called the Acris Communautaire.
Wait, what is that?
It's basically the accumulated body of all EU law, every single piece of it. A candidate country has to pass 35 separate modules or chapters at their own pace.
Okay, 35 chapters.
And passing a chapter doesn't mean you just agree with the EU's philosophy. It means systematically tearing down and completely rewriting your own domestic legal code so it matches Brussels perfectly.
Wow. So it's not just a handshake agreement.
No, it covers everything. Environmental regulations, justice systems, economic governance, And you have to pass every single one of the 35 chapters. There's no automatic entry.
And no fast track to just skip the homework?
Exactly. You have to prove you can do the work.
But passing those chapters requires proving you are a fully functioning sovereign state,
Yeah.
right, capable of actually enforcing those laws.
Right, which brings us to the biggest hurdle.
Yeah, according to the source, this exposes the single biggest flaw in the independence plan. Chapter 17, Monetary Policy.
Yes, Chapter 17 is this massive, totally unavoidable roadblock.
To understand why, we really have to look at the currency, because right now, Scotland uses the British pound.
Right.
And according to the source, the Scottish government's Growth Commission has this plan called sterlingization.
Yes, sterlingization.
The idea is that an independent Scotland would just keep using the British pound informally for about a decade after independence before they eventually launch a Scottish pound. I mean, on paper, it sounds like a safe, cautious transition plan.
It sounds very safe to voters who just want continuity. But it is a profound problem for EU accession.
How so?
Well, the EU needs to know you can pull your own economic levers if a crisis hits. If Scotland uses the pound informally, this sterlingization, they don't control their own interest rates.
Because they don't issue the currency they're using.
Exactly. The Bank of England in London sets those policies.
So wait, if Scotland's economy is really struggling, but down in London the economy is overheating, the Bank of England is going to raise interest rates to cool down London.
Yes.
Which means a homeowner in Glasgow suddenly sees their mortgage skyrocket, and the Scottish government can literally do nothing about it.
Precisely. They would be a passenger in their own economy.
Yeah.
And in the eyes of the EU, a country in that situation literally does not have its own monetary policy.
And you cannot pass Chapter 17 without one.
You absolutely cannot.
But the EU doesn't just ask you to set up a central bank and then wave you through, right? They want proof it actually works.
Oh, they want solid proof.
Mm-hmm.
The European Commission requires candidate countries to demonstrate a proving 3 to 5 year track record of macroeconomic stability.
3 to 5 years.
Yes. And the clock on that track record doesn't even start until after you have established your own central bank, launched your own currency, and proved you can manage it without the whole thing collapsing.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the author actually does the math on this timeline.
Yeah.
And I think we need to walk through this step by step for the listeners.
Let's do it.
Let's assume an incredibly optimistic scenario. Everything goes perfectly. 0 global recessions, no supply chain crises. Let's say a successful vote for independence happens in September 2027.
Okay, so 2027 is our starting line.
The author estimates that the legal and institutional exit negotiations, just to disentangle from the UK, would take 4 years. So boom, we are now in 2031.
Right, 2031.
Then you enter that decade of sterlingization planned by the Growth Commission, 10 years of using the pound informally. That takes us to 2041.
And just to be clear, at this point in 2041, you still haven't even started the EU's clock.
Right, you haven't even started. So in 2041, you finally launched the new Scottish pound. But you can't just release a brand new currency into the wild, right? The markets would tear it apart.
Oh, speculators would have a field day.
So you have to peg it to the British pound to stabilize it, which requires massive foreign exchange reserves. Let's say you peg it for a year to build confidence. Now we're at 2042.
Okay, 2042.
Then you finally float the currency independently, and that is the exact moment the EU's 3 to 5 year track record clock finally starts ticking.
Which means you're adding 3 to 5 years of mandatory economic observation on top of everything else.
Right. So that takes us to 2047.
And then you still need the final accession treaty to be ratified by the parliaments of every single existing EU member state.
Which brings us to 2048. The absolute earliest Scotland could realistically join the EU, based on their own economic plans, is 2048.
Over 20 years from a hypothetical vote.
So how on earth can politicians promise a quick and smooth return to Europe when the math is this rigid?
Well, the source points out a really stark contrast between political messaging and legal reality. Politicians love to use phrases like, as soon as practicable, or smoothly and quickly.
Which sounds great, right?
It does. These phrases do double duty. They soothe cautious voters who are terrified of losing the pound while simultaneously giving committed nationalists the hope of a rapid return to Europe.
But it totally glosses over the reality.
Completely. It hides the fundamental reality that EU criteria simply cannot be met without full economic sovereignty.
Wait, okay. If the informal use of the pound is the anchor dragging this whole timeline down, why not just rip off the Band-Aid?
What do you mean?
Like, Forget the 10 years of sterlingization. Just launch the new Scottish pound on day one of independence. I mean, it would hurt, but at least it starts the EU's 3-year clock immediately, right? Doesn't that speed it up?
It might mathematically start the clock sooner, sure, but it front loads an apocalyptic level of risk onto a brand new state.
Apocalyptic, that's a strong word.
The source explains it perfectly. Launching a new free-floating currency immediately, without any institutional track record, invites massive economic volatility.
Because nobody trusts it yet.
Exactly. You risk severe capital flight. Businesses and everyday citizens would move their money out of Scotland just to protect it. That leads to a massive devaluation of the new currency right out of the gate.
So your life savings could instantly be worth a fraction of what they were yesterday.
Right. And politically. A 2024 poll cited in the article shows only 11% of Scots prefer a new independent currency on day one.
11%. Wow.
That's electoral poison. No politician wants to run on that.
Okay, so a day one Scottish pound is out because of the economic shock. What about the ultimate workaround? What if they just unilaterally adopt the euro on day one?
Unilaterally.
Yeah, just print price tags in euros, use euros in the shops, and skip the pound entirely. Doesn't that prove to the EU that they are fully committed to the European project?
Absolutely not. In fact, unilaterally adopting the euro is explicitly forbidden by EU treaties.
Forbidden, really?
Yes. The euro is meant to be the end point of a highly structured economic convergence process.
Right.
It is not a shortcut you can just decide to take.
And the source brings up a perfect real-world warning for this, don't they? Montenegro.
Yes, the Montenegro example perfectly illustrates the danger of trying to cheat the sequence.
So Montenegro is not in the EU, and they are not formally in the Eurozone, but they unilaterally use the euro as their everyday currency.
Right.
It's kind of like moving into an apartment without signing a lease and just expecting the landlord to eventually hand you the deed.
That's a great way to put it. And the European Central Bank hates it. They refuse to let them into the EU, precisely because unilaterally using the euro undermines the ECB's control over the money supply.
And the timeline is crazy. Montenegro started their EU accession talks back in 2012. Here we are in 2026, and they are still not a member. They are completely trapped.
And the ECB's logic makes sense, honestly. The central bank can't act as a lender of last resort or properly manage inflation if countries outside their legal jurisdiction are just using their currency rogue.
Right. They can't balance the books if someone else is spending the money.
Exactly. And furthermore, consider the political implications back in Scotland. The source notes that 40% of Scots say they would be less likely to vote for independence if it meant they had to adopt the euro.
So let me get this straight. This loophole is legally forbidding by the EU. It traps you in a session purgatory just like Montenegro, and the voters don't even want it.
It's a lose-lose-lose.
It's deeply ironic, too, because the central argument for Scottish independence is to regain ultimate sovereignty from the UK Parliament in Westminster.
Right.
But to pull off this euro loophole, Scotland would literally have to hand over its entire monetary control to the European Central Bank in Frankfurt, an institution where, as a non-member, they wouldn't even have a single vote.
This raises an important question. If full EU membership is trapped behind decades of currency prerequisites, what about a halfway house?
A halfway house.
Yeah, you often hear politicians talk about the Norway option, joining the European Economic Area, or the EEA.
Oh, that sounds familiar. Nigel Farage and the Brexiteers used to love pointing to Norway before the Brexit vote, didn't they? As proof, you could leave the EU but keep all the economic perks.
They did, right up until they realized what it actually meant, and then they abandoned it, calling it Brexit in name only.
So what does it actually mean?
The reality is, joining the EEA does extend some single market benefits, like the free movement of goods, services, and people. But it is fundamentally not full EU membership.
Okay.
It does not put you inside the European Customs Union. You don't get access to the Common Agricultural Policy, which is massive for rural economies.
Right.
And crucially, just like the Montenegro trap, you do not get a vote in EU institutions. You have to accept and enforce the laws coming out of Brussels, but you don't get to write them.
So you become a rule taker, not a rule maker.
Exactly. There really are no shortcuts.
Okay, so we've established that the theoretical economics of currency and these loopholes just don't work. But let's say even if you solve the currency issue by 2048, you still have to fund that new central bank.
Which is not cheap.
No. And that brings us out of theory and into the physical bureaucratic reality, balance sheets and borders. The author dives into GERS, right? Government Expenditure and Revenue Scotland.
Yes. GRS is the Scottish government's own core economic report.
And those numbers paint a tremendously challenging picture for accession.
They really do. The report estimates Scotland's deficit at 11.6% of its GDP.
11.6%. And to put that in perspective, the UK's overall deficit is 5.1%.
Right. Now, some critics mistakenly claim the EU would instantly block Scotland from joining because of this deficit.
But the author clarifies that's not quite right.
Yeah, the author clarifies that the EU won't necessarily stop you from applying, but they demand incredibly strict fiscal discipline once you are in their orbit. The EU's target limit for a deficit is just 3%.
Wow. So they had to bridge a massive gap from 11.6 down to 3.
Exactly. Look at the real-world example of Croatia. When Croatia joined the EU, they were almost immediately hit with an excessive deficit procedure.
Which basically means mandatory austerity dictated by Brussels.
Yes.
And austerity means severe budget cuts. Just imagine a newly independent Scotland. They need to spend heavily to build all the infrastructure of a brand new state.
Embassies around the world. A new military.
A new tax collection agency, border infrastructure. Trying to fund the birth of a nation while simultaneously slashing public services and raising taxes just to satisfy the EU's 3% deficit rule. That would be agonizing for everyday citizens.
It would be incredibly painful. And speaking of physical infrastructure, we have to talk about the border.
Oh, the border.
Yes. If Scotland eventually rejoins the EU and the rest of the UK remains outside, you are legally required to draw a hard customs and immigration border right across the island of Great Britain.
Which is massive, because England is overwhelmingly Scotland's largest trading partner.
Exactly. The source notes that politicians often wave this away with the exact same wishful thinking that Boris Johnson used. Remember when he promised there would be no borders or checks in the Irish Sea regarding Northern Ireland?
Oh, yeah, we all saw the chaos that caused.
Right. A hard border isn't just a line on a map. It means physical checkpoints. It means customs declarations for every lorry heading south. It means regulatory checks on food and goods.
It fundamentally disrupts the just-in-time supply chains that businesses rely on every single day.
Completely.
And the staggering thing here is how little of this mechanical reality has been transparently shared with the public. This brings us to the information black hole detailed in the source.
Yes, the FOI battles. This part of the analysis really gets to the heart of the democratic process.
Because voters can't make an informed decision if the actual mechanics are hidden from them.
Precisely. The author outlines massive freedom of information, or FOI battles, where the government actively fought to keep the public in the dark.
Let's go back to 2014, during the first independence referendum. The Scottish government was confidently claiming that an independent Scotland would just automatically stay in the EU.
Right, seamless transition.
And they assured the public they had specific legal advice to prove it. But when journalists submitted FOI requests to see this legal advice, the government spent tens of thousands of pounds of taxpayer money fighting in court to keep it hidden.
And when they finally lost that court case,
they were forced to admit that the legal advice never existed in the first place.
It's astounding. In fact, their own top law officers had been warning them that EU membership was definitely not automatic and would require incredibly complex negotiations.
So they spent public money to hide the fact that they were bluffing.
Yep.
And the instinct to hide these mechanics hasn't gone away. Fast forward to 2023, and there was another major FOI battle.
The timeline one.
Exactly. The Scottish Information Commissioner officially found that the government had partially failed to comply with freedom of information laws because they were deliberately hiding their internal estimates on how long EU accession would actually take compared to other candidate countries.
I mean, why would a government hide the timeline unless the internal reality completely contradicts their public political promises? Yeah.
Right. It makes you wonder what the internal timeline actually said.
The overarching lesson here, which the author stresses heavily, is that the UK should have learned from the agonizing process of Brexit that the details matter.
Treaties matter.
Physical borders matter.
The brutal reality of institutional disentanglement matters. Running a campaign that treats the actual mechanics of leaving an economic and political union as an afterthought, or worse, actively hiding those mechanics, is a blueprint for disaster.
Now, someone listening to this might argue, but hey, look at Ukraine. The EU moved incredibly fast for them after the invasion, so clearly Brussels can bend the rules and fast-track a country if the political will is there.
The author actually anticipates that exact argument and addresses it directly.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The EU did move historically fast to grant Ukraine candidate status. But candidate status is just permission to sit for the exam. It is not full membership.
Ah, I see. The European Council made it abundantly clear that all the fundamental conditions, the rule of law, anti-corruption measures, democratic institutions, and economic governance, all of that must still be fully met before Ukraine can actually join the bloc.
So the rules still apply.
The rules absolutely still apply. Political urgency might get you to the starting line faster, but it absolutely does not teleport you to the finish line.
So what does this all mean? I mean, we've covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by acknowledging a very real, very valid emotional desire from voters who want to reverse the pain of Brexit and right what they see as a great historical wrong.
Which is completely understandable.
Totally understandable. But when you strip away the soaring rhetoric and look purely at the blueprints, the picture changes entirely. You see the inescapable necessity of Chapter 17.
The catch-22 of sterlingization.
Right, trapping a new nation in a decade without monetary control. You see the cautionary tale of Montenegro, proving you can't just sneak your way into the euro.
You've got an 11.6% deficit staring down the barrel of EU-mandated austerity.
And the physical reality of erecting a hard trade border with your biggest economic partner. I mean, it is a mechanical reality that simply cannot be ignored or wished away.
Treaties don't care about a nation's mood. You just cannot bypass decades of strict economic prerequisites with a really good campaign slogan.
And Macmillan leaves the reader with a really stark political warning about the current moment. He argues that plunging back into a binary, exhausting constitutional fight over independence right now might actually backfire spectacularly.
How so?
Well, treating a far-right victory in the broader UK like a potential Nigel Farage premiership as inevitable and using independence merely as an escape pod, he says that's a strategic mistake.
Because it fractures the opposition.
Exactly. It divides the progressive vote. It distracts immense political energy away from urgent, tangible issues like housing, healthcare, and infrastructure. And ultimately, it could empower the very right-wing populism it's desperately trying to escape.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Instead of tearing the island apart to seek a solo 20-year path back to Europe, the author advocates for the UK to put in the hard work of slowly, collectively aligning back with Europe together.
It's a masterclass in reading between the lines of populist promises, really, no matter which side of the border they come from. But, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder, just building on the mechanisms we've explored today.
Okay, what's that?
If the European Union's accession rules are so rigidly demanding, if a newly independent nation must demonstrate a flawless, multi-year track record of independent macroeconomic stability, control its own currency perfectly, and enforce strict deficit austerity before they are even allowed inside,
Right.
does the European Union actually function as a sanctuary to help aspiring nations grow and stabilize? Or has it simply become an exclusive club designed only to protect the wealth and stability of states that are already fully established?
Wow. That is a brilliant question, because if you truly want to unmake the omelet, you really have to understand exactly how the kitchen works. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.